My name is Jin Tsuchiya from the Colorado Health Foundation's Policy and Advocacy team, and I am once again joined by Roger Sherman and Danielle Glover from CRL Associates, and Alvina Vasquez from PowerMap. A few weeks ago, we hosted a live webinar about the COVID-related budget impacts to Colorado's local governments. During that webinar, many great questions came through the chat function that we were not able to answer, but that's why we're following up with you today. This recording is a short Q&A with our panelists to answer some of those great questions. As we attempt to dive deeper into local policy issues and build out the field of advocacy at the local level, we definitely see additional opportunities with this subject matter and many others to connect about bridging health policy issues and local governments. So let's dive right into it today. And Roger, this first question is for you. We did not talk about school districts during our August 4th webinar, but what is happening across the landscape of the educational system?
Sure. Well, Gene, besides the obvious operational challenges, there are significant budget challenges as well. School districts rely on property tax. In fact, some districts, that's their sole source of revenue. And generally across the state, property taxes make up about 40% of funding for K through 12 education. So districts are obviously seeing a negative impact on their revenue based on COVID. Impacts to taxes really in the commercial and oil and gas areas. And that is resulting in about an average of a 5 to 8% budget reduction. So districts are responding by reductions in staff. They're trying to do that a lot through attrition and retirements, but they're also freezing salaries. You see furlough days, transportation is being reduced, technology spending is being cut. So it is impacting kind of the ability to provide good quality education to their students. You know, on top of that, the state plans to spend about 15% less on K-12 education next year, and that means a per pupil spending reduction of about 5%, although the impact varies by district. And the other thing I'll mention is there have been some federal relief dollars, and I believe Governor Polis allocated about $500 million of coronavirus relief money to K through 12 schools. But that money comes with a lot of strings, and it cannot be used to backfill or offset the cuts that we're seeing in general operating expenses. And some districts are concerned about, because the guidelines and guidance on what to spend continues to change. They're worried about spending too much of that relief money and then facing the potential of having to give some of it back. So that's the status, and it's definitely a big challenge. And then you add on just the difficulties of teaching in this environment. It's a struggle right now.
That's very true. Thank you, Roger. Danielle, I'm going to turn over to you for this next one. The question that was asked back on August 4th was, when will the Energize Colorado Gap Fund open? And as part of that, the response, Danielle, could you also talk about what it is and what kind of relief they're talking about?
Sure, thanks. And yes, I would like to describe a little bit about the fund before we get into the timeline, just so that everybody's on the same page. Energize Colorado is a nonprofit organization that's been recently designed to help Colorado's entrepreneurs, small businesses, and nonprofits recover and rise from the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. It's being led by volunteers and innovators from across Colorado in the public and the private and the nonprofit communities. Outside of the fund, there's also an effort to provide free tools, resources, and programs to revive and invigorate our economy. So getting to the GAP Fund, this is designed to provide about $25 million in small business loans and grants to boost small business enterprises that are really the economic engines throughout the state, as they describe it. Sole proprietors, businesses, and nonprofits with less than 25 full-time employees can apply for up to a $15,000 grant and a $20,000 loan for a possible combined total of $35,000 in financial assistance. Nonprofits supporting economic development, small businesses, and tourism, and those supporting our priority businesses in the state are going to be prioritized. So the fund is encouraging everybody to apply, but they are putting some priorities out there. So again, it's around the economic development and tourism base. In addition, Energize Colorado will be prioritizing small businesses who are majority owned by Black, Indigenous, people of color, veterans, or women, are in the rural areas with a population of less than 50,000 people, in the tourism sector, or with limited or no access to capital financing or other federal, state, or local grants and loans. So it's a little bit about the fund. As far as the timeline, it is true that the Energize Colorado Gap Fund application has been pushed back and delayed. However, it is expected to open up very, very soon. And I will add a little bit of a good note. Since our last opportunity to meet with everybody, Energize Colorado held a webinar earlier this week talking about the fund and what it's going to take to apply. So one, I encourage everybody to go check out that new webinar that's available on Energize Colorado's website, and be sure to sign up for updates in their newsletter, because I do think that the application is going to open up very soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Danielle. Alvina, I'm going to turn it over to you. It's a question about rural advocacy. The question is, do you have suggestions for advocacy for rural communities? Asking, as it is essentially impossible to travel and advocate, as things on the ground take so much time now. And historically, this has been our best way of doing any advocacy work for resources.
Well, I think the first step is definitely, we talked about the Department of Local Affairs. Each region has a regional director, so building relationships within the DOLA in your area is definitely one way to do some outreach and advocacy. I also think it's important to track what's going on in City Council and boards and commissions in your community. So while City Council makes decisions, they do hear from the commissions and the boards within those areas that make recommendations and have kind of their feet on the ground on what's really happening. So building those relationships is important. A lot of the meetings have moved to online, so checking out what meetings are happening, always read the agendas and the notes, because you're going to know when is your time to have your voice heard on key issues. So I think those are very different layered ways. And I personally always think sharing personal stories with those elected leaders and those in power does affect them. So if there's somebody that is a member of your organization that has a really compelling story, making sure you're lifting up those stories to paint the picture of what's happening in your community, I think is a great tool.
Thank you, Alvina. So Danielle, I'm going to go back to you with a question about collaboration that's happening at the local government level. The question for this one reads, are counties and or adjacent municipalities attempting to collaborate to optimize resources, in parentheses, issues like healthcare, infrastructure, school, housing, food insecurity, etc.?
Thanks. Absolutely. Cities and counties are always looking to work together. And I think it's been especially important for everyone to come together and find ways that they can complement each other's resources or combine resources. An example that comes to mind is the Denver Metro County's Departments of Health met early in this pandemic to ensure that everybody was taking a regional approach to controlling COVID-19. And they continue to meet and discuss their options and how they approach our current situation. In addition, CCI and CML have been convening meetings, conducting surveys, and sharing examples among staff and elected officials to help provide best practices and lessons learned, so everybody can learn from each other and continue to approach this in a way that is efficient and effective, knowing that so many things are currently changing. Cities and counties, I think, are going to continue to meet and have continued conversations about how they can work together. So I think in the next couple of months, we're going to see even more approaches, regional approaches, surfacing here soon. Another example I just wanted to bring forward that isn't necessarily specific to what's happening with COVID, but is a great example of how counties and how cities have come together previously, and I think is a good example that we might see in the future, is the Metro Mayor's Caucus and the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative created the Flex Fund to provide one-time assistance to help people experiencing homelessness secure permanent housing. And they've been doing that for a few years, and in fact, year over year have been increasing the amount of contributions that each city is making into that fund. And now, Jean, I have a question for you. I know that the Colorado Health Foundation cares a lot about the census and paying close attention to what's happening with the census. So I was wondering if you could tell us what's going on with the census.
Yep, thank you, Danielle. Not only is it a great question, but it's also incredibly timely. Rather obviously, local communities across our state rely on a complete census count for a variety of reasons. Most notably federal funding, political representation, and then valid data about the populations that they serve. As of today, though, there are only 6 weeks left to complete the census, and we've only barely cracked the final response rate from a decade ago in 2010, which was about 67% of Coloradans responding to the census. So getting it right should be a big deal for all of us, and that of course includes local governments. Some of the communities across our state have done well to get out to the count. There are a couple counties in the Denver metro area that lead the state with their response rates, but there are many others that have a long way to go. And we know that some of those particular communities have hard to count populations. And that's the area where we absolutely cannot risk an undercount with a population during this important census count. So in order to make really the best possible policy choices that we can over the next decade, we've got to make sure that everyone is counted, and it's actually quite easy to do this year. The online form is safe and easy, and completing it in a way that will prevent the door knockers from coming to your house as long as you get it done before they follow up with you that way. I do want to add that if anyone is still interested in helping their communities with the census, there are some great resources out there. Again, to Alvina's point, the Department of Local Affairs does a lot of work in this area. Many jurisdictions have a collaborative complete count committee going on in various parts of the state. There are also advocacy groups like Together We Count and Common Cause that are leading of course, the advocacy side of things as well. If you want to reach out to us at the foundation, we have been very active in the census this year and would love to hear from other community members about this too. So that's a quick little plug about what's been going on with the census. That's it for the questions today. Thank you to all three of you for answering these additional questions from the audience back on August 4th and providing your expertise to everyone. Before we wrap up this recording, I do want to once again call out the local ballot tracker that has been created this year so that you may follow and monitor the developments of ballot measures in our local communities. The tracker itself is still being updated as more initiatives make their way to the ballot, but you can find a direct link to that tracker in the email that was sent to you for this recording, as well as in the description of this video. Thank you again for joining us. All the best.